Let's turn our attention to lighting the background with strobe.
I set up some lighting for her, but because I needed to add light, the background, which was already dark, went even darker. So I placed a small speedlight on the ground and fired it up to the bush behind her. Here's another one where it was super easy to light the background. I just stuck the speedlight in the tree and fired it in TTL mode. Point, shoot, done.
This setup shot shows the placement of all the lights. Starting with an ambient light image, it's okay, but not too exciting. With the mane and accent, we have good lighting on him, but because I wanted to expose to get some color in the sky, the barn went black. With the addition of another flash unit aimed at the barn wall, we can properly record everything that we want the viewer to pay attention to. We'll be shooting here, and I'll show you why I lit the background with the strobe. This was at sunrise, and the light wasn't bad, just not as direct as I wanted. So I lit her with my softbox strobe, but the result of adding light to the subject means the background, which doesn't receive the same light, renders darker. Firing that background strobe lit the background very nicely. You'll also notice that I feathered it toward the subject a bit to get some accent light on her. The difference between using natural light and adding light can be pretty dramatic. I didn't think this flat light was appropriate to this background. I lit her with a single bare flash off to the right, and also fired a background light on top of that mound of clay to get its texture to show. This is the final image that I wanted and ended up with. Great light on the guy and subtle yet illustrative lighting on the truck. But I had to work a little to light it that way. This is how I shot the base image with him in the shot. Main softbox to our left and an accent light to our right. Then I made a few other exposures with the flash at different spots around the truck. Since the camera was on a tripod, I placed all those images on separate layers in Photoshop and used layer masks so I could use just the portions of each image that I wanted.
And the final image with some final artwork.
The before and after shows the comparison of the subtle yet worthwhile difference. I use this Stoffen barebulb flash modifier to disperse the strobe's light in all directions, rather than being concentrated in one spot. In this application, I'll use the flash to lighten the background. The Stoffen spreads the flash's light in a wide coverage area. Mixing a high-key subject with a low-key background is not a pleasing look, so I needed to add light inside of that little building. A strobe at low power with a diffuser that simulates a barebulb effect provided the easiest solution. Because the strobe is a small source of light, it's important to position it so that its light doesn't cause distracting shadows on the background. Of course, this technique works for mid-key as well. The area behind her was too dark, so a little pop with the strobe behind her showed all of that gray garbage very nicely. This overall lighting pullback shows the softbox and the need for a light behind the motorcycle.
as a cheaper alternative to the Stoffen or other commercially available products. You can take the label off of a frosting container like this and use it for a bare bulb effect, meaning that light is dispersed in almost all directions. But you need a transparent one like the one on the right. The left one is too opaque.
I put a bare bulb diffuser over the flash and placed it on the ground behind the motorcycle. I wanted to get a vignette of light behind the bike. Without any flash, this was okay, but the background really needed some help since it looked too flat, dark, and lifeless. While the softbox provided a better main light, the major improvement was that bare bulb type background light. The black interior on this car would need to be lit to even see any detail at all. So I balanced a portable strobe on the back of the passenger seat back. The main softbox flash sets the exposure for both flashes, and since I had my Duncan Hines container cover on the interior flash, it worked fine with no flash ratio compensation.
Before we get into the next senior example, we need to touch on a bit of exposure theory. We should have a rough idea of how bright or dark things will record in a single exposure. This is approximately what our eyes and minds will see with a scene like this. When we look at a dark area, our eyes and minds essentially make a different exposure, if you will, for that area. The same goes for the brighter areas. But this is what a camera records in a single standard exposure with normal contrast and dynamic range settings. And now if we place and expose for a subject out away from the tree into the brighter areas of the open sky, we lose even more of the darker detail on the bottom of that tree. So how do we predict how dark that tree will appear? To answer that, we need to know the approximate dynamic range that we can capture in a single exposure, and that's based on the dynamic range capabilities of your camera's sensor. To test it, I pointed my camera at my 18% gray RV cover and made varying exposures at then under the normal exposure. I would say that after 3 exposure value steps under the average exposure, we start to lose detail in the darker tones. From experience, I knew that the underside of that tree behind her would be nearly black. But based on what I just explained, we could have taken a meter reading of that area under the tree, and it probably would have been about 4 steps under the ambient exposure of the girl. That tells us that we need to lighten it during the session or in post-production. I chose to brighten that area during the session with flash. And I did it with my softbox in TTL mode. When using a softbox that close, there won't be any hard shadow lines to worry about. I decided that I wanted to accent that tree trunk in the background to add some interest to the lighting. And I really like that look. I did it with a simple speed light on the ground, both with it and the main softbox in TTL mode. This is okay, but then I wanted to try to backlight her hair. I originally placed a flash behind her head because I wanted some sort of highlights. But with straight hair, a backlight doesn't really look that good. So then it occurred to me to put a flash on the other side of the bush to provide some nice saturation in the leaves and highlights inside of the tree. I think this image looks more lively with all those sparkles. And of course, that was a bush light. The technique I'll describe is a bit unusual for this image. It just needed something. So I chose to light the ground just behind her, or you could say in front of her. She was holding a speedlight aimed down at the tall grass. I like the design and the tonalities this creates. This one is kind of boring as is. So I used a barebulb modifier on the flash he was holding so it would light the grass and his face.
There might come a time when you need to lighten up a background, and you can't get there to set up a separate light. This method isn't the ideal way to lighten a background, but sometimes you have to do whatever it takes to get the shot. The next examples will show how you can simply use an on-camera flash to light the background in greater proportion than the subject. I was driving to a location with this senior girl and spotted a terrific uninhabited farmhouse. I just couldn't pass it by, so we hopped out and started shooting. I really wanted her in the house, but I didn't want to spend a lot of extra time setting up a background light to light up the interior because we were trespassing. So this was where we started, but the inside was a little too dark. So I attached a flash unit on the camera and turned it on without any flash compensation. Because she's in sunlight, the flash didn't really add much light to her, but because the background was so dark, it lightened it up quite a bit. But it was a little too light and artificial looking, and her shadow was too obvious. So I dialed the compensation down one stop. I'm okay with this, and while it's not what I would prefer, I chose to make that compromise. On-camera flash lightened the background quickly and easily.